All right, well, welcome back to the Future Human Experience. We're joined by a very special guest today, Ashli St. Armant. Thank you so much for coming to the Future of the Human Experience.
I'm excited.
Well, also, we are in a very special place too. We're actually in
Yeah.
the Chandler Center of the Arts, where you are the artist in residence starting this year.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about not only how has that experience been, but what has brought you here to Arizona and have this moment with us.
I wrote a musical called North, and I'm so blessed to say that 4 different arts organizations came together to help support this work. And one of them was Chandler Center for the Arts.
Wow.
And prior to that, I continued to perform with my band, Jazzy Ash and the Leaping Lizards. We do jazz for young audiences. And I also write mysteries. And I do lots of other creative things that really, almost all of it falls into the realm of children's media. And then one day I woke up and I wanted to write a musical because why not?
Yeah.
And we could talk more about that, but the musical, the subject matter is really close to my heart. And so that's how I got familiar with Chandler Center for the Arts and came here, and the energy here is just different. I've created lifelong friends here, but beyond the personal side, on the professional side, I just feel so supported as an artist. It's really something special. I always say over and over, I'm just a regular weirdo. I'm just so strange and weird. I wake up with outlandish ideas every single day. And it's just baffling to me still that there are people who want to invest in that. This morning I was thinking, it's like if I loved playing with dirt, right? And finding worms in the dirt. And somebody walked up to me and they're like, I love the way you find worms in dirt. Can I give you money so you can do that for the rest of your life? Like, that's how it feels to me. Like, it's not to diminish what I do. I love what I do, but to find that other people appreciate what I do is a blessing. And so we had our first run of North with the Commissioning Partners Theater. So it went to 4 different theaters in its first season. And then this year it went to 10 different states. And Chandler being one of them, which means that Chandler was the only place that had the show twice, which was awesome because we went through an incredible development process between runs. And while I was here in, I think, January or February of this year with North, I found out that I was chosen to be the artist in residence here, which is so thrilling to me. And I mean it from the bottom of my heart. I'm not just saying it because people are giving me money. I love this town. It is so refreshing and unexpected in how invested this community is in the arts and the people who make art, including young people. It just resonates so well with my ethos. So I love to be here.
And I remember that moment because we were actually here with my family. We were actually in that seat right next to the soundboard. We're watching the musical with my kids, and what you do and what you've helped us as a community kind of connect with this work has been not only inspiring, but we're also very excited about what's coming next as well. With that said, I would love to talk to you a little bit more about what you're working on now. You have a very special work of art that you're building on right now. Tell us a little bit more about, is it Ordinary Folks?
Yeah, Ordinary Folks.
Ordinary Folks. Tell us a little bit more.
So Ordinary Folks, the title says a lot.
Yeah.
I really want to focus on art that has been made by ordinary people who are just like us. Sometimes we call that folk art or folklore or folk stories. But really, at the heart of that is the kind of things we dream up when nobody's watching. You know, the kind of songs we make up when we're doing the dishes, when we're singing to a child to go to sleep. And every culture has a body, a canon of folklore, folk tales, and stories and songs. I'm really focusing on the stories that come from the African diaspora, most specifically the African American diaspora, but this project also includes West African tales and stories in the Caribbean. I'm taking these stories and turning them into songs. That's the simplest way to explain it. But at the heart of it, really, the more I have studied this work over time, because studying folklore and folk songs has always been a part of what I do on stage, I have found such amazing works of art that I had never, ever heard, even as a Black person. And the more I dig, the more I realize that there's some truth to learn about why that's true. I have shared that oftentimes I go and I find, a folk song in a book from the African American community, for example, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what it sounds like, because I only have the sheet music, in front of me, and I go online or something and I find a white choir. It's almost always a white college choir, and at first it used to make me really angry. I'm like, why are they singing our songs? And then I had to ask, why aren't we singing our own songs? Why can't I also find a Black choir doing this? Why can't I also find a Black folk artist? Now, the more I've researched, the more I have found out that these people do exist, but they're hard to find. And they're like diamonds in the rough. But why collectively aren't we doing this? Other cultures like Japanese culture, Hawaiian culture, they celebrate their cultural music, their historical music and songs and stories. And from an outsider's perspective, we go to hear them as well, and we have a reverence for them. But we don't do that in our own culture. And the reason is because those songs and stories were taken from us to demean us and to show example, in their opinion, of how we are simple, how we are less than, and how we don't deserve the same rights and et cetera, and as other people, even down to our dialects. And so it's understandable that Black folks would want to, turn away from that material and say that doesn't represent who I am now. I'm looking forward, but there's some beautiful lessons to be learned from that music and those songs and those stories. Not just the hard stuff, but what I find so magical is the beauty, the love that I hear in these songs and stories, the playfulness, the ingenuity, that comes from a time period where often Black folks were abused, undereducated, separated from their families, and yet found ways to be playful and thoughtful and to, lull their children to sleep and to give dating advice. Like I find all kinds of nuggets like this. I never thought that like Black folks would even have the capacity to think about dating and courting someone, but they did. And so anyways, I'm unearthing these stories for myself, learning about their history and what these stories metaphorically mean in terms of a snapshot of history, and then turning them into songs that will eventually be little vignettes on stage for a wider audience of, people of lots of cultures.
And Ashley, I've always found interesting your work now, because I love what you just said, right? Like sometimes we're just looking forward. We're like, hey, you know what? Let's just get excited about the future. And as we talk about the future human experience, as someone that's been in the tech space, we're always trying to figure out, hey, what's coming in the next 6 months, the next year? And what your art has done for me as not only as a parent, but as a member of this community, is to sometimes just say, hey, sometimes also looking back also grounds us not only in the present, but how we could also move forward.
Yes.
And as someone that's coming here to Chandler, also being a place where for the last almost 50 years has been built on basically building the technology of the future. What has been that role, in your opinion, about navigating the changes of this world that you're living in as an artist, but that technology is also kind of coming in and creeping in and disrupting, to a certain extent, the creative pieces? How have either you navigated as an artist, and what is your either hopes or concerns about how artists are navigating what technology is being built today, just a few miles away from where the center is?
It's tricky and it can be scary. I kind of go back and forth, if I'm honest. Let's take social media, for example. As a person with ADHD, it's really easy for me to fall into the rabbit hole and like scroll and scroll and scroll, and it doesn't leave me much time for creativity. It's also a great tool to share with people in the world. So I can't get away from it. I oftentimes threaten myself to shut it all down, but then nobody will know that I'm having a beautiful performance that they can share that has communal aspects and speaks to our ancestry. They won't know about that unless I put a post up about it, right? There's also the pressure with social media to post all the time, all the time. And I think that we've kind of lost something where, the magic is lost of having this one chance to experience something. So I am a huge fan of live experiences. I also write for the ear a lot. So my mystery series, for example, is an audiobook series. I also wrote an album specifically for this tool called Yoto. It's like this little box. It's kind of like Siri for little kids, but it has these little cards, and you put the cards in, and then it'll tell you a story or bedtime, whatever. But there's no screen, and so it incorporates this interesting technology, but it also lets kids take stories with them, so they can be outside and playing in the grass, or incorporate what they're hearing into their play, into their drawing. That's what I'm really interested in. It's what are the unique ways in which modern technology can be incorporated into real life experiences. For me, especially with North, my last show, being the tour manager for this last tour, which was a lot, I learned so much. And I learned about how the ins and outs of stagecraft work, because I have a vision that's very simple, but to translate that onto the stage so that people can literally see it. We won't be able to see it unless we can turn these lights on. But then beyond that, we can set a mood with different lighting, with different technology, and all those sorts of things. And I like to use technology for spectacle in my shows, but to make it feel even more personal. And that's a really interesting thing I'm seeing coming up in theater more and more. I remember when I saw Color Purple on Broadway. I had seen Color Purple many times before. It's a show that I'm in love with lots of colors and things flying here and there and all this sorts of thing. And then when I saw it on Broadway, it was a wall of wooden chairs. And I was like, what? I spent Broadway money for this? But with that, they were able to communicate so much more through their song and story. Technology was still being used, but I was being transported to a different place. I recently saw The Outsiders on Broadway, which won the Tony this year for Best Musical. It's set in Oklahoma in a junkyard, and they use technology in such creative ways that make me feel like I'm in a junkyard. It didn't make me feel like I went to outer space or to some futuristic place. They created rain on stage, and they're dancing on what looks like gravel, and they're having this fight scene, and they're bloody. And I'm like, okay, but that's all technology, right? How do they make me feel like that guy really got punched in the face? How do they make me feel like it was really raining? How do they make me feel like they're rolling around on gravel and they're literally getting scuffed up? That takes technology to make me then feel like I've transported into Oklahoma in the 1960s. So I think it's a balance.
Yeah. And Ashley, but you've been also using technology in your research, right? Because you're in the research process
That's
today.
So true.
How has that played in not only navigating to find these stories, unearth these stories, but also navigating the sense of like, okay, is this actually accurate, or is this misinformation? Or how have you been navigating the research part and using technology to find these stories and unearth these stories?
That's a really interesting question that no one's asked me before. And it does incorporate into my research, and it does actually help it feel more real, which I hadn't thought about. So thanks, Eric. But for example, one of the scenes in North is a community of people who live out in the bayous. The term we use is the Maroons. Maroon communities were people who escaped slavery, but instead of traveling north to freedom, they would go and hide out in the bayous because this was the land that they knew best, okay? And the way in which I discovered this is because someone referred me to a book called Slavery's Exiles. And in that book is real accounts of people who had escaped slavery. And the account that I used the most was this account from 1780. And unfortunately, an enslaved person ratted out a community of people out in the bayous, and they were then taken in for questioning, and they were interrogated. But because of that experience, they were able to tell exactly how they were able to survive in environments like this for up to 10 years. So I had read that in a very modern book, like Slavery's Exiles. I bought it on Amazon, and I had done the play and everything. But just this year, on Juneteenth, I thought, I want to do something really black.
Okay.
What's the blackest thing I could do today on Juneteenth? I was like, well, this account had to come from somewhere. Where did it come from? I wonder if I can find the original interrogation.
Wow.
So I knew it was in 1780. I knew it was outside of New Orleans. I knew that, libraries tend to keep this kind of information around. So I started digging in the archives of interrogations and court cases and court accounts online. And it took me a few hours, but because of modern technology, I didn't have to go down and make an appointment in the archival library, whatever. I just started typing, and within a few hours, I found scanned copies of the original interrogation
Wow.
on manuscript paper written in script.
Wow.
Where it was literally bleeding through the pages because the scans, they're still the scans of the original pages, so you could see the text on the other side bleeding through. From 1780, it was like, it really happened. I mean, I know it really happened, but like this document that I'm not yet touched, but to be able to see that it actually happened. And the most interesting part was that it was in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
I was not expecting that. And then I did go down to New Orleans and I talked to a genealogist and a historian who knows this information and talked to him about it. And I really wanted to talk to him because some of the accounts that I've read in this original manuscript mentioned places that I couldn't find on maps. And he was able to say, with me sharing that information with him, that I found the Spanish were in rule at that time, but the enslaved people spoke French. So the interrogator was probably Spanish speaker, hearing them speak in French. And when they said a word, they are thinking about, they're doing this translation in real time. So what they said was probably B-O-R-N-E, born, but with their French accent, bon. So they wrote down B-O-N-N-E. So that's why I couldn't find it on the map.
Wow.
So you know what I mean? It was like, but because of this technology, it opened up all this brand new world and perspective of like where all this information comes from. So it's exciting.
And what I find fascinating about that too is that because we live in this digital era today, I think it also gives you now an opportunity, because you've unearthed this story, you've connected these dots. Now these dots are connected for someone else to come by in the next generation.
It's true.
And build on that story too.
And because I was, ankle or knee or neck deep into these documents, then I started reading about other, court accounts. And I found a story about a 12-year-old girl who was enslaved by another Black person. And she got angry enough that she burned his house down. I'm like, that's a whole play in itself, And just these stories that have yet to be told. Again, like you said, not very many people can travel to New Orleans to open up these documents. And in fact, when I went to New Orleans, my goal was to go down and actually see them for myself, but the library was closed for several weeks for the summer or whatever.
Wow.
So even with a person like me who has the resources to go, it's not always feasible. But now people like me who are just nerdy enough to go dig them up on the internet can do so. So it's pretty cool.
Wow. And Ashli, how has that played now in building these stories, right? Connecting these dots? How's that journey been for you? Being part of the Chandler community today, are you also unearthing some stories here? I think last night you had a very interesting experience with someone bringing a document to you as well. Share us a little bit more about how has that been using the community to bring these stories to life to you as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's a multifaceted research process, right? Some of it is me spending hours online researching information and going down the rabbit hole. Some of it is me going into communities like Chandler and talking to people directly about their own life stories and their experience sharing folk life. And I spent some time this week with Annie Beach, who lives here in Chandler, and she's amazing, amazing. And I thought we were gonna have a lighthearted conversation about like folk music and like, someday I wanna come and hear you and your kiddos sing, because she runs this amazing local folk music get together twice a week with young people. We ended up having a really deep conversation about how to present music that doesn't come directly from your own specific culture. In my conversation with Annie, because she's white, we're talking about when she presents Black folk music. But even for me, I'm from California, my family's from New Orleans, but I also want to present music that comes from the Caribbean and from the Gullah Geechee people of the Georgia, from the Carolinas and things like that. So how do you do this in a way that's respectful? And so gleaning that kind of knowledge from someone who's 81 years old today, is really a treasure. And Annie shared with me that she feels equipped to do this work because she has been doing it so long, because she was married to someone who was a musician who was from the Black community, and that her mother was her mother was a folklorist and a studier, is that a word? A person who studied Black folk life. And then last night, we had been talking about, she's like, my mother, she had this wonderful book of music of Negro spirituals that I always loved. And she brought me that book last night and gave it to me. I mean, it's just tattered in the corners. It looks like something from a movie set, but it's real. I can't wait to peel it open, and I'm going to do it so carefully. And even on this trip, I brought the book of Negro folklore collected by Langston Hughes. and I spent $88 on it because it's out of print. And I keep it in a Ziploc bag, because it looks like, so worn and it's so delicate. And the first thing I did when I got it was like literally crack it open, and I broke the binding. So there's something magical about that, though. It feels like magic. It feels like I'm tapping into some ancient text that like is going to live and breathe through me. And in some ways that's 100% true. So it's going to take all of that. It's going to take the conversations, the ancient texts, the more modern texts like the annotated African-American folktales by Henry Louis Gates, which is an entire course study all in its own. Videos that people put on YouTube, videos that people put on TikTok about things I never heard of before. And, going and talking to people in person. It's taking all of that for me to cobble together what will eventually become ordinary folks.
Yeah, sharing that right now just made me reflect too. Like sometimes we have this assumption that everything that's digitized is the truth. And I think your work is helping us discover like there's still so much more to discover. It reminds me when I was little, I wanted to be a paleontologist. And then I saw Jurassic Park. I was like, isn't this great? That's exactly what I want to go do. And then someone told me, like, Eric, all the dinosaurs have been discovered. Like you're done. Like you have nothing else to do. And I was like, oh, I guess you're right. Right. And then eventually, my path to being an engineer started. But even to this day, like paleontology is still a thing. Like there's still so much discovery to do. And I think today in this world of abundance, of digital abundance, we think that everything has been uncovered or unearthed. And your work and your art is reminding us that there's still so much human work to do to fulfill that magic, I think that you're sharing with us.
That reminded me of two things. One is that just this week, this Monday, I had a gig at the La Brea Tar Pits in California, which is right in the heart of downtown Los Angeles. And in ancient times, these ancient creatures got stuck in the tar. And so they have all these fossils there. And so you can see an entire skeleton of a mammoth, this kind of thing. And in 40 years of my life living there, I had never been. So I took my whole family, not so they could see me perform on stage because they did that before, but so we could go to the tar pits. And it was so cool to see all these amazing skeletons. And as we went through, we learned that they're still digging up these bones. That floored me because, like I said, we're in downtown LA. We're right next to, the premier art center of Los Angeles, et cetera, et cetera. I'm performing on stage with a bunch of technology, and right beneath our feet are hundreds of dinosaur bones that are yet to be discovered and uncovered and put together is really kind of astounding.
Yeah.
The other thing, and this could be its own conversation entirely, I was recently not in New Orleans, but in Vacherie, Louisiana, where my family's originally from. Yeah. So, because you live in New Orleans, I have a million questions for you. But anyway, for your listeners who haven't been there, it's about an hour's drive outside of New Orleans. And that's the area they call River Road, where you can still visit many plantations and learn about plantation history and things like that. That's where my family is from. And so I met through someone who saw my show, who introduced me to her cousins. I met these women who are doing amazing work for preservation of Black culture there, is the short version of this story. And while I was there, their family reunion was happening. And I was helping them prepare. And I had this picture in my phone of the only photo I have of my family member, of any family member in Vacherie. And it's my grandmother and her godmother. We didn't know who that woman was. We just know that that was her nanan, or her godmother. And so I showed it to them. I said, this is the only photo I have of anybody in my family in Vacherie. And the woman I was talking to gasped. She's like, the other woman, that's Mama Jo.
What?
I was like, who's Mama Jo? She said, that's my great-great-grandmother. Wow. So they knew each other to the point where they were, connected in that way. But we didn't know yet if they were family. Because me and these women had already started calling each other cousins. Wow. Girl, you my cousin, because our family's from this small town. They're like, who would know if they were related? Is Uncle Did. Why did they call him Uncle Did? We don't know. But he was going to be at this family reunion. So when it started, I went out and I talked to him. I said, do you know who this is? He said, yeah, that's Mama Jo. I said, how about this woman? Referring to my grandmother. He said, that's Edna. And her little sister was Laura. And her daddy his name was Raul, but they called him Royal. And his daddy was named. And he just started telling me all this stuff about my family that I'd never heard in my life. It was so amazing. He's 97 years old. And the reason why I bring it up now is because after sitting with him for a while with my pen and paper, we figured out that the women I was talking to, their great-great-grandfather and my great-great-grandmother were siblings. Their great-great-grandfather's name was Joe.
Wow.
They called his wife Mama Joe. That wasn't her name.
Yeah.
So, but Joe and his sister were siblings, my great-great-grandmother, and they came from Haiti.
What?
I never knew that. And here's why. I use technology to trace my family tree through ancestry.com, but all arrows point to Africa. The genealogy test, my blood test won't tell me that there was a stop along the way, right? But he knew. And so he told me that they had come after the Haitian Revolution and all this stuff. You can't learn that through a blood test. It was amazing. So I'm going to ask you questions.
Okay.
So
right.
You said you lived in New Orleans for 4 years.
Yes.
Where did you live and what was that experience like?
We lived in Metairie.
Oh.
So right outside of there. I worked in Norco, which is right outside of New Orleans. I worked in a refinery there. And I absolutely loved it. It was a great cultural experience, but it was also right after Katrina. And I think that was also a very meaningful experience for me because I had an opportunity to be part of the rebuilding of the city. And so I felt just deeply connected with that community work. My night job was mentoring students or helping students with their resumes or going to UNO and working with some students there. On the weekends, we would do either Habitat for Humanity or Relighting New Orleans, like just little projects. But yeah, from a culture experience, from a people experience, from a city experience, I absolutely love that city. I still try to go back every 6 months.
I was going to ask you if you've been back.
I'm an advisor for the business school of Loyola, and so when they asked me to do that, I was like, yeah, what does it entail? And they're like, well, it requires you to be back here every 6 months. Is that okay? I was like, I guess, all right, I guess I have to do that, right? And so I remember telling my wife, I'm like, hey, they just asked me to be an advisor. I have to go back. Like, I just have to go back. And sometimes I guess we could take the family, but mostly I'll just be me for a couple of days.
So when you go to New Orleans and you have very little time to go, what are your go-to places?
It is very little time, I still do the crawfish boil. I try to get char-grilled oysters. I try to do at least Café du Monde once. Try to get different type of po' boys as well, gumbo shop.
So food.
Yes,
food.
correct. Yeah, I'm sorry. I should have clarified. Yes, I go.
Listen,
food,
it didn't take an explanation.
I absolutely go to the food.
Right.
I try to have I end up having like 5 to 6 meals. I'm a foodie.
I love it.
But also still have really good friends there, and so I have an opportunity to connect with folks. But also what I love about New Orleans, and especially with the work I get to do now, talking about this feature, the human experience, right? New Orleans was a reminder for me on like the humanity of things, right? So even as the world is changing, especially after like a hurricane, right? What brought us together again was just being a good neighbor. And at the end of the day, even though the world is changing, AI is coming, jobs are coming and going, but the root of what humanity is just how are you there for each other? And New Orleans has always been a reminder of that for me.
I think one of the most beautiful things I saw after, actually it wasn't Hurricane Katrina, it was the pandemic. Trombone Shorty's grandmother, it was her birthday, and they knocked on her door and then ran away. And when she opened the door, his whole band was playing for her on the street. And it, like you said, and we have other accounts like that, during the pandemic when I remember, Parisians playing violin on their balconies and stuff. We always go back to the arts. These are the ways in which we reconnect every time. And sometimes it's, Beyonce concert with thousands. And sometimes it's an auntie on the piano at Christmas. I feel hopeful when I think about that. When you were asking me earlier, does technology become a disruption to making art? It does, but it just causes us to pivot. But at the end of the day, I think as humans, we're always going to be hungry for live art experiences. And when I say that, communal experiences where we can express ourselves. That's really what art is. And for me as an artist, it's a bit of an inside scoop. My least favorite thing to do actually is get on stage and sing. I love being in a classroom, in a communal space, hand clapping with city workers. Art experiences where it feels like home. is the real example of who we are. It makes me sad when we think about things like Shakespeare as elitism, because Shakespeare would not have wanted that. I loved going to the Globe Theater in Europe because I'm privileged to do so. That when I got there, it felt like a rowdy crowd getting to have this communal experience where people are shouting and, clinking their beer mugs together. That's what it was supposed to be. It was theater for the people. It was their Jerry Springer. It was their YouTube. You know what I'm saying? And so I think we're always going to continue to make art like that. So that makes me feel hopeful.
I was watching this interview not too long ago, Ashli, too, and someone asked about where does AI play in this space, and someone had says like AI is like craftsmanship, right? Like I'll always, AI is going to learn how to emulate things, but it's not going to invent new things, right? And one of the perspectives that he shared was AI could do the work, could do the craft, but an artist knows when to stop. And an artist is the one that says, hey, you know what? I've done all this work. I'm ready to share this part of my perspective to the rest of the world. And that perspective will change in 6 months and 12 months, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And that was fast. That was an interesting. Does that resonate at all? As you as an artist I'm sure you're always trying to come up with new things. But
this leads into my question for you.
Yeah,
I've
sure.
come up with my question.
Oh, okay. All right.
But I don't know if you're ready for that yet. So tell me if you are or not.
Okay. Well, sure. I'm ready for it.
Oh, you
ready? Yeah, I'm ready for it.
Okay. I'm terrified of AI.
Okay.
So could you sell me on it?
Oh, ooh, okay. I like it. I guess, we could go back to that perspective. I think AI is simply just an extension of what we are teaching it, right? And so when we have an opportunity to bring all these data sets and say, hey, this is our perspective of the world, AI is simply just going to learn that and regurgitate it back to us. And so I think AI is here to basically get rid of some of the, I would say, mundane tasks that we have to do sometimes.
Okay.
And give us an opportunity to unleash, some other spaces of our humanity.
Okay.
With that said, we also, right before we started this conversation, you mentioned the movie WALL-E, right?
Yeah.
And I remember watching WALL-E, being, oh, this is an interesting movie. And then it takes a completely left turn, in the last 20 minutes. And I was like, I never saw that coming.
I'm trying to remember now, what happens in the last 20 minutes?
Well, no, they're all in a ship just watching Netflix, basically, before we had Netflix.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what they do all day. There's no productivity, right? In their world. And because Earth basically has just kind of been deteriorated. And not saying that is not a possibility. There's absolutely a percentage there, but I do feel that our ability to navigate this world today that's becoming much more digitized is much more in our control than it would have been 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago when the industrial age was coming about, right? The industrial age was coming about and we were just freaking out about how our jobs are going to change for certain communities and what have you.
Yeah.
I remember sharing the story about when ATMs came out and the communities were very, very concerned about ATMs being integrated into the branches. Because there was a lot of workers there. There was 25 to 30 folks there. And they would put in this machine and basically replace half of those jobs.
Yeah.
And some people said, we're not going to do that, right? We can't because this is our community, this is important work and what have you. And certain banks decided to do that. And so when they did that, what they realized was those jobs were disrupted.
Yeah.
But the cost of operating that branch went significantly down. And so now they were able to open up new branches and new communities that did not have access to financial services. And so the question is then, when we bring these experiences to the arts, what would be the cost of making a production tomorrow? In theory, it would be lower, so therefore the barrier of access and entry for those performances or for those experiences will be much more lower now, right? And we're able to not only build beautiful theaters like the Chandler Center of the Arts, but have different type of experience all over different communities. Because I would say maybe 100 years ago, this was a privilege to have a location like this. And now you're seeing not only the City of Chandler investing in what the future of the arts could look like, but also making it much more accessible. And I think technology plays a huge role in making these experiences more accessible. But at the end of the day, it's artists like yourself that are part of that conversation to figure out, hey, how do I use AI so I could bring my art to these stages in the next X amount of years?
It's an interesting perspective. I hadn't really thought about it like that. When you first said it makes certain things more convenient so that we can use our time in other ways, I thought about the microwave. My mother told me that she had an aunt who was terrified of the microwave. She thought it was witchcraft.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, we haven't stopped cooking.
Yeah.
It is convenient when you want to heat up your leftovers, but we still use the oven and the stove. And when you don't have the time, you can throw some popcorn in the microwave so you can spend time with your family. Right?
Yeah.
So I guess that's true. I'm not just guessing, it is true. And it hasn't, completely annihilated chef jobs everywhere.
Sure.
So that's a great perspective. On the other hand, I think about my son who's going into voiceover work, right?
Oh, yeah.
I've got friends who are like, "Oh, this is a tough time to start in this business,
Yeah.
But then I remember you just saying, I will know how to imitate, but it won't know where to stop or how to be inventive. And maybe with the skills that my son has, he'll be able to give different perspectives to characters than an AI character.
Absolutely. And I would say too, like if I would have an opportunity to talk to your son, or maybe he's watching this recording in a few weeks, that's your start. Like this career is where you begin. How that evolves in time, where you find yourself in this space, that's really what's the rewarding experience, right? And so voiceover work is fantastic today. Will it change in the next 10 years? Absolutely it will, right? And so how you find yourself in those changes is really what's the most rewarding experience. And this is coming from a former engineer, or an engineer, I would say, because no one takes that away from you, that experience. You could always go back and share that expertise in other ways. But today, who would have thought that Audible would be like one of the most...
I was just going to say, like, I do a myriad of things, and most of them I could not have imagined as a child. I never thought, I will be an audiobook writer, and I'll be a children's traveling musician. And like, I didn't even know that these things existed. Yeah. And some of them didn't when I was a child. So okay, Eric.
Actually, with that said, just real quick as we wrap up, where do you see technology playing a role in creating these experiences, right? Because I do believe that, very similar to you, I do believe the premium experience is us sitting right there watching our artists do what they love to do.
Yeah.
But also, like you were sharing earlier, that you went to all these different experiences and you felt just immersed in these spaces.
Yeah.
Share with us a little bit more about either the complexities of creating these experiences, or the easiness of using this. Like when you're building a production basically from zero, how do you think the role of technology will play in these spaces? Or do you think about that this early on in the stage?
I definitely do think about it at this stage. First of all, if anything, I have such a humbled appreciation for all the artists that it takes to build a show like the kind of shows that I build. I can make a show that can play on a street corner, and I always encourage other people, because now I consult with other people who build shows. I always say, build a show that could play on a street corner, meaning like the heart has to be there. All the bells and whistles can just be icing on the cake, but at the heart of it are these characters that people will fall in love with, right? But when I do want to bring it into large stages like Chandler Center for the Arts, it does take lighting designers and scenic designers and costumers and stagehands and grips and there's all this language that I had to learn. They're like, oh, like how long are your legs? I was like, my legs? As it turns out, that's a theater term, so it takes all kinds of people to make this work. For me, I spent a lot of time in the past. I spent a lot of time in history, and I think it's so important to recognize history and to glean from the lessons that were already learned so we don't have to relearn them. But also, I honor my ancestors by honoring their stories, because some of the stories that all of our ancestors hold are better than fiction. And I use technology on stage to help transport us there. Because I always feel like if you have one Black friend, if you have one Republican friend, if you have one trans friend, et cetera, it changes everything. It changes your perspective. It's not just something that you heard on the news. So in that way, it's very easy to forget the past and like, oh, that's the past, and actually laugh at them. And say like, oh, they didn't know anything about medicine. They didn't know anything about science. I actually think it's magical what they did with the resources that they had. And so, again, what I try to create on stage is an environment that transports you, where you're not feeling like I'm doing some kind of magic trick. It doesn't feel like a spectacle, but it feels like home. And we do that through sound design. We do that through special lighting, certain colors on stage, the costuming. For example, in North, our costume designer created a look for all of our characters where they were the silhouettes of costumes that people would wear in the mid 1800s, but the fabrics that we used were modern West African garb. So it had this really cool like mesh. Yeah. It's not something that maybe you even noticed, but it's the way that melding of worlds affects the way an actor walks, affects the way they twirl their skirt as they walk out of a room. We think about all those kinds of details, and even the simple technology of a sewing machine makes all that possible for us.
Yeah. Well, Ashli, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and our audience today.
Thank you.
We are so excited for what you are making here in Arizona. Where can people connect with you, find you, and continue to follow this great work?
I'm on social media, kind of. I'm at Ashli St. Armant on Instagram and Facebook. Hey Jazzy Ash is my band on the same platforms, and then my website is ashleystarmant.com.
Wonderful. And then this play will go live in...
Yes. It probably will be here, most likely in the fall of 2026.
Fall of 2026.
But I'm going to keep coming back and forth here and
Absolutely,
building the show and doing workshops, so there might be opportunities for people to see the inside scoop of how the sausage is made, as they say.
Wonderful. And that will be in the Chandler Center of the Arts website. So again, Ashli, thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure having you on the podcast.
This was cool. Thank you.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. This is Eric, the host of the Future Human Experience. The reason why this podcast was created was to be a platform for others to really bring these conversations to life. So if you're enjoying this content, please like and subscribe. It will really help our channel and expose these ideas for others. Thank you.